Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today. We'll get started in just a minute, but as people start linking into our event, I just wanted to say a few welcome words. My name is Gretchen Himsel. I'm with Children at Risk, and I want to tell you about our organization. We're a statewide research and advocacy organization. We're a nonprofit and work on issues affecting the whole child, including education, parenting and family well-being, health and nutrition, immigration, and the fight to end human trafficking. We also foster collaboration among other nonprofits doing work in these areas. And this year we've started the Texas Family Leadership Council, who is a partner with us for this event. Shell has also been a strong supporter of Children at Risk for many years, and we want to thank them for sponsoring this event today. Children at Risk has events throughout the year, like this one, that focus deeper on important issues affecting our children, crisis events, and new research that we've done. You might be interested in two of our upcoming events, The Future of Children on October 14th, where we again invite national experts to speak, and we will use a new kind of Pecha style of presentation that moves very quickly. And then our election debrief is on November 4th, where we will dissect the results of the election and discuss important issues for the children's agenda for the legislative session that begins in January. I'm sure that you're all familiar with Zoom webinars by now, but I'd like to highlight some features that we'll be using today. The chat feature can be used by everyone, including our panelists, to comment on the conversations that we have today. And if you have questions for our panelists, please type them in the Q&A section, and we will relate them to our moderator, who is Dr. Bob Sanborn. After our seminar today, we will ask you to complete a short survey to hear your reactions on what you've heard. And we appreciate your feedback because it will help us plan future events and topics. And that is the SurveyMonkey link that is in the chat currently. Thank you again for attending this afternoon, and we will get started in just 1 minute.
All right, are we ready to get going? Thank you guys very much for being here. We're excited to be doing the status of children in STEM education, the STEM seminar that we're doing overall. We have some great guests, so we're excited about that. First up, Jodi Moon, Dr. Jodi Moon, could you join us? Jodi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Dr. Bob, how are you?
Very good, very good. Jodi is the director of our Center for Social Measurement and Evaluation at Children at Risk. Jodi, in really just a couple of minutes, I wonder if you might sort of set the stage for us in terms of where we stand in STEM education.
Absolutely. But before we start, I do want to acknowledge that I'm currently the director of research at Children at Risk, loving my job, but I am a former middle school math teacher. So the subject that we're talking about here today is near and dear to my heart. And back, I pursued my master's in licensure back in the early 2000s. And even then, this was a conversation that was happening and needed to be had. And I had the option at that time, just based on credits of teaching history, social studies, government, believe it or not, French or math. But the math meant I had to take extra coursework, and I did it because I so highly value the need for representation. I had, at that time, 3 of my 4 children were daughters, and I wanted to kind of help support the STEM fields and show that women were working in those areas as well. So yeah, this is just such an important area, and it's not a new topic. So, you know, my job is to set the stage to kind of get us thinking about this, because we have a great bunch of panelists who are going to talk to us about what all the exciting things are happening right now. But let's think back. STEM since 1990 has grown 79%. Right, those occupations have grown that much. And notably, between 2017 and 2027, labor projections have it growing another 13%. Now, we're here as a national group. We have representation from all over the country, but specifically in the state of Texas, this is even larger than that. So the projections for Texas, 20%. Right? So second largest state in terms of growth for STEM. So we know it's very important. We know if you want to think about quality of life, we know that those are occupations that afford people a living wage. That's great. But we also know that for a long time, there have been a lot of children who have been either deliberately or unintentionally guided away from pursuing STEM occupations, right? And so this is part of what we're going to try to talk about. in that same time frame of 2000, or I'm sorry, from 2017 to 2020, we had only 26% of Texas college grads were graduated with STEM fields, in STEM fields. And notably, while the number of males doubled in that time, women are remaining stagnant, as are underrepresented minorities. So like, these are concerns, and we start fixing that when kids are young, right? We get them interested in STEM, we teach them what inquiry is, and we give them the skills they need to have success in college STEM courses. But, you know, as we can see here, Texas is not doing so well. For the first time, we've dropped below the benchmark NAEP average in 2019. So, you know, there's clearly work that needs to be done. Next. Thanks. You know, and at the same time, that Texas average is all our kiddos, right? But we know that there are several areas where we see gaps. I referenced the discrepancy between males and females obtaining STEM degrees. We have issues with students from underserved backgrounds. They're 16 times less likely to be prepared for STEM college coursework, right? Again, back to that. That means we need to be starting really young, getting kids interested, believing that they can be in STEM, because we have so many students who have the innate ability, but because of other factors are being held back from pursuing STEM education. Geography is a really interesting one of these, right? 17% of schools in rural areas have students meeting the ACT STEM benchmark, rough as compared to 30% in our urban areas and suburban areas. So these are all things that we need to think about. Next slide, please. And as we all know, because of the way we're all presenting today, these situations are all currently being exacerbated by COVID-19, by the pandemic, right? So here locally in Houston, Good Reason Houston just did an interesting analysis, and we kind of like took that out and said, well, what does this just mean about math proficiency? Students just in the last 9 weeks of last spring lost roughly 7.2%. I'm sorry, not 2%, 7.2 points, right? A decline in proficiency of 7.2 points. So like, and that's just last spring. That's not looking at summer lag that we would normally expect. And it's not factoring in the current situation where many of our school districts are in flux, and that is not intended as a criticism, but they're in the process of perhaps moving from hybrid to face-to-face. So there's just so much that kids are facing. And at the same time, for students whose families have opted into online learning, we know that there's still a lot of lack of access. So we don't know if all those kids are actually who chose hybrid or who are learning remotely, do they have the access they need? We did an analysis using pre-COVID data, census data, and across the state, it would be about 17% of kids would not have access due to either Wi-Fi or a computer. So, you know, there's a lot to think about. And then at the same time, we know Maslow and all the others who tell us kids can't learn if they're not taken care of. Before COVID, 22% of our students here in Texas were food insecure. So our current projections are as high as 31%. If kids are hungry, they can't learn. So there's so many factors that are they're being brought to the forefront by COVID. And in addition to that, we have this knowledge that we need a STEM workforce, right? We need to be educating our children in that regard. Last slide, please. So I'm actually going to kind of soften this slide a little bit, because looking through our exciting list of panelists, we're going to get to a lot of these conversations with them. I would highlight that middle point. We need to be thinking about our underserved children. They were already at a disadvantage in terms of being able to access the education they need to pursue STEM careers. And now it's very, very possible that that's going to worsen. So I really hope that we're thinking about that. I have a shout out to Dr. Matkins, who just describes herself as a STEMinist. I loved that, loved reading that. And Dr. Bob, I'm going to turn it back to you so we can talk about how we can shore up our STEM education.
Thank you, Dr. Moon, very much. And I hope that you'll ask questions, even if it's through the chat box as we go forward. And I'm going to invite anyone else who's part of this today that you can go ahead and put in the chat box some of your questions, and we'll try to get to that. So our first segment, our roundtable, we're going to bring up 3 of our specialists here today. Look at this, Dr. Amy D'Amico, who's with us today. She's the Division Director of Professional Services with Smithsonian Science Education Center. Welcome, Amy. Thanks for being here. Are you in DC, Amy? Is that where you are?
My center is based in DC, but we're all working from home still. So I live in Northern Virginia.
Okay, excellent, very good. And we also have Sheila Smith with us today. She's the Science Education Consultant with the Shell Science Lab, the Regional Challenge Judge. She's out of Jackson, Mississippi. Sheila, welcome.
Thank you.
And by the way, Sheila, my daughter went to college in Jackson. She went to Millsaps.
Millsaps, great school.
A lot of good restaurants, I could say, as a dad visiting there, a lot of good restaurants in Jackson.
That's why we're the fattest state of the nation.
but with that sort of food, right? What are you going to do? And then also from Mississippi, Alicia Conerly is here with us. She's with the NSTA Multicultural, the Equity Division Director. Thank you very much, Alicia, for being here as well. You're also Mississippi. Are you from Mississippi originally, Alicia?
I was born in Long Beach, California, but raised in Mississippi.
Excellent. Good, very good. Well, let's start. And Sheila and Alicia, let me ask you this question. I grew up in Puerto Rico, and if Puerto Rico were a state, it'd be significantly poorer even than Mississippi, right? And so when we talk about places like Puerto Rico, Mississippi, Texas to some extent, but we know many other states where relatively high levels of low-income families, how do you make sure that those kids, especially low-income kids, are able to have access to quality STEM education? And Sheila, maybe you could start on this one.
One of the things I think that we're doing injustice to the unserved community, we are not providing professional development training for teachers. Because if you're sitting in a classroom, I go in classroom and observe teachers, and you sit in the classroom, listen to students talk, and you hear a child say, oh, I got to go to STEM next. I sure hate that class. Yeah. That class is boring. Something is going wrong, because in a STEM class, kids should have fun. They should be curious. They should be solving problems. But when you go to a STEM classroom and you see the teacher telling the student, open the book and answer the questions, or you see even high school students doing cookbook labs, step by step by step. I was guilty of that myself because I didn't know any better. So I think we're doing an injustice in training the teachers in these at-risk areas. I think if we do a better job of training the teachers, they will be able to excite the kids, because all kids come to school in elementary and preschool with curiosity. And we kill that because of the way we provide instruction in the classroom. And that's one of the things. My thing is professional development training. I'm a sticker for that. You can't do one workshop and expect the teacher to be an expert. It has to be sustained and ongoing.
Alicia, what would you add? What would you add to Sheila's description there?
Sheila is definitely very accurate, because I am the current principal of an elementary school, and I see it even in my own staff. Because of COVID and us shutting down in March, we had to close and open a school this August all at the same time. So on the elementary level, my superintendent and other administrators, the focus is the tested areas. So I've had to strategically and maneuver ways to get the STEM piece on my site. And so I have a teacher who is teaching just the science this semester, and then next semester, the social studies. And that was even a fight, because our superintendent is scores, because Mississippi is still at this point going to be tested. So it is an injustice, because now me on the other side, from being a teacher to now an administrator, I have to think about both. Scores, yes, but STEM embedded in that could help us with our scores in the ELA and the math. But the training, like Ms. Sheila said, it is inadequate, it is insufficient, and we must do a better job because we're not preparing our children for our feeder schools where science is tested.
Dr. Amico, from the Smithsonian's point of view, and from your point of view, we see other countries that have done significantly better on this stuff than we have in the United States. What's been the big difference, Amy?
Well, I mean, context is very different. I sort of anecdotally, I don't want to speak on behalf of the Smithsonian or take a stance on behalf of the Smithsonian, but I think one thing, just to sort of echo what Alicia and Sheila have both mentioned, the importance on science in our country is very different than math and reading. So, you know, certainly what ends up happening is there's an emphasis on high stakes testing, and the high stakes testing largely falls under English and math. And as such, that's where the focus tends to fall. And so when you couple that with, you know, particularly in the elementary school space, a lot of teachers don't necessarily feel prepared to be able to teach engineering or science. And if they do, they fall back on what they know, which is how they were taught, which is, you know, again, to echo Sheila's statement, you know, cookbook type labs. And I know that's what I experienced when I was growing up. And when I went, honestly, I went through graduate school and I started out in I got my master's in biology, and my master's thesis was descriptive biology. And I didn't have a hypothesis because it was the first time anyone was looking at, you know, a specific aspect of this insect. And I didn't know what to do because I had been taught that the scientific method was a series of steps and that you follow said steps. And that's what science is. And this was graduate school. So I had already acquired an undergraduate degree in science. So I think we've also sort of what science is and how then it is modeled for students isn't necessarily what it actually is. So there's a bit of a disconnect. Like, it is fun. It is all about, you know, innovation and creativity, and trying to figure out like what all the data is telling us. And there's a lot of uncertainty with that. And then I think that potentially also feeds forward into understanding of, you know, sort of scientific literacy and where adults understand and don't understand science. And I think that has been emphasized in the COVID era that we are living in today.
So let me segue from the COVID era and let me stick with you for a second, Dr. D'Amico. How the possibilities of online education obviously are immense, right? If we do these things right, it doesn't seem like we're there quite yet. But do you see that this experiment and this forced experiment in online education can lead to more around STEM, especially in reaching low-income kids and frankly, young girls?
So I first of all want to give a shout out to all of the teachers in classrooms today and administrators who are doing an amazing job. I mean, the fact that our schools and districts turned on a dime to go from, you know, complete face-to-face to 100% virtual when there was no preparation, I think really speaks to the power of teachers. And I needed to say that. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunity here in the virtual space. I do think there's been a lot of innovation that's happened in a relatively short amount of time. In part because of the need of it to happen, but I think it's also really emphasized the disparities as well, right? So we've all known that the digital divide is present, and I think that there's a fundamental inequity there that really needs to be addressed before we can really sense the power of virtual learning. Particularly from, you know, students in either rural and or low socioeconomic situations. But I think there's also a lot of misconception about you know, sort of access to internet and broadband, that it's not just rural locations. Like it can happen in suburban and urban locations very readily, in part because of the cost, but also because of the wiring. So, you know, there's sort of an infrastructure piece that really needs to be addressed, sort of fundamentally, to ensure that this is, you know, access for all. And then we can really start to think about how we are engaging students in the virtual space in a really robust way. One thing, you know, my bias being science, one thing that does worry me in this, sort of, as I've seen as a trend, is there are a lot of places that have used this as an excuse to not teach science because it's hard. You know, harder, maybe there weren't the resources, or maybe there, you know, you want to have materials in kids' hands and that's not necessarily feasible. So sort of punting on it, in part because it's hard, but in part because, well, we're not going to get assessed on this year, so we'll worry about it later.
Yeah. Sheila, talk a little bit about that, this idea of this online education and how it's hindering or helping or could possibly help in regards to STEM, access to STEM.
Well, in Mississippi, we have the Great Divide. We have schools that have no internet access, have very little with the communities. And I think that it has done more to hurt the STEM and science program. But even before COVID, we had that Great Divide. And one of the things that I've noticed in working with, not related to what you asked me, but I want to say that I noticed working with schools, is the gender gap. You have schools that actually have a STEM program, but they want to put the girls in coding and they want to steer the guys toward engineering. And so I think that that's a disservice to the females that are in the STEM class. But I think we need to do more. I know a lot of students, a lot of teachers and schools and principals are using the COVID issue as a way to not provide any type of hands-on activities for the students. And it was a struggle before COVID because they want to do the cookbook labs or no labs at all. But now I said, well, you know, there's always virtual activities. But again, if it's not tested, as Alicia said, or Amy, it's not a focus. And I think we have to get away from that, because I think the step-by-step method of how many of us were taught, we see that going on in our response to COVID. A lot of people, well, they had to wear a mask. Now they don't, so they need to make up their minds. Science is not an exact subject, and I think that's part of the problem.
Alicia, how about for you guys? I mean, what's going on in your school in regards to this online learning? It's probably pretty tough, I would guess.
It is pretty tough, Bob. I am in a rural area, and the fact that we are minimal to no internet service. I mean, because right now I'm actually in the car using my phone as a hotspot in order to be able to have some internet service. And just to think, my children, my students, my scholars do not have that same opportunity. And then also in my district, we will be going one-to-one in November. That's when they're going to deliver our devices to our students. And due to COVID, I have 33% of my families chose virtual learning, but they chose it with no devices or minimal devices. We have, yes. And so they're using, there's one of my families has 6 daughters, and they're using a phone to complete the work, all because a grandparent was diagnosed with COVID. So they've seen what it's done. So it's like a double-edged sword. So even any education with my children right now is a struggle, especially in the rural areas. And then with the scope of Mississippi, we're still slated to test for accountability. The dynamics have shifted, and I don't think they've shifted with us.
Yeah. Alicia, let me ask you something that Sheila brought up, and then I want to go back to Sheila on this. But we often see the real difference between girls and boys. And when you look just at testing, you know, up to 5th and 6th grade, girls clearly do better, right, in science education.
Yes.
What happens there? Is it let me, instead of feeding you, what do you think it is? What is that's happening in between those grades to make that difference?
I think I've seen it firsthand. It's who's teaching, because there are more female teachers on the elementary level than in there's more females than males on the elementary level. And I can use my oldest son, for example. It wasn't until 4th grade that he had a science teacher, male science teacher, that opened his eyes. And then with that, he began to think more about it. Now he wants to go into STEM. And I'm sorry, Miss Sheila, he wants to go into engineering. I'm like, oh, no. But the thing about it is that we're not strategic as well. We don't have an intentional focus with who we hire in these positions on every level. Gender is an issue. Race is an issue. We need to be diverse all around in order to reach all of our children, because it's in those younger years where you can steer them and you can mold and shape their minds into thinking about more, problem solving, all of that. But when a male child does not see a male teacher until high school and is a coach, they think that's the only thing they can do or that they should look forward to. So that is a lot of the reason as to why intentional focus with who we're hiring and the diversity and the equity behind it.
Sheila, talk a little bit about that sort of divide that happens between elementary and middle school.
Well, when you look at elementary teachers, it goes back to the training, and it's not, in some cases, it's not about resources, because I have gone into elementary schools and they have boxes and boxes of resources sitting up in the classroom, and they don't know what to do with them because they have not been trained. Let's face it, the elementary teacher probably had one science content course in college. And they don't feel comfortable teaching science. So I think it's teacher behaviors and the content area and the comfort level of the teacher that actually account for the difference. Because if you ask the child, a lot of time in K-8, I don't like science. I don't like science. Why? That should be your best subject. I don't like STEM. It's boring. So I think it all goes back to teacher behavior, because even if you have the resources, if you don't know what to do with those resources, it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah. Dr. D, how do we battle this sort of like at a higher level, at a policy level, at school district levels? How do we make sure that we are passing policies and we're doing the right thing in regards to making STEM accessible to everyone?
I mean, a lot of the work that we do, and there's a fair bit of work that we do, but I will mention one sort of area specifically, and actually many of the folks who are part of your roundtable have been part of this work in one form or another, so I'm sure they'll be more than happy to chime in as well. We sort of look at, sort of a system of change, whether that's the school, district, region, state, and work with teams of folks partnered with a sort of a mentor, if you will, to develop a logic model related to a specific problem and practice that they're having to recruit or retain a diverse STEM teaching workforce. So at the kind of the core of student achievement, the single most important factor is a teacher. So, if you have a student that has, ineffective teachers for multiple years in a row, the data does indicate that they're far less likely to reach their academic potential. And so, what the work that we're trying to do in collaborations with schools and districts and states across the country is to really have schools take a look at what their STEM teacher population looks like, and how they can, and not from the standpoint of it being like a zero-sum game, but from the standpoint that all students benefit from a diversity of ideas and from the ability to have role models and mentors that come from a diverse background, but also to have an opportunity to have role models and mentors that look like them, whether it's gender or race or cultural background, so that students can see themselves in these careers, in these disciplines in the future. And we really have to start this really young. Kids make decisions, not even consciously, but decisions about themselves and what they're capable of as early as elementary school. So if we're waiting until middle and high school, we've already lost a lot of them. You know, in some cases, you've got parents who are going to be, you know, sort of advocating for their kids and be like, no, yeah, no, science, engineering, these are things you can do. You know, you can be a female and be an engineer. But it's a lot harder for them to sort of conceptualize that without seeing that possibility for themselves. So that's a lot of the work that we focus on, in part because the mismatch between students and teachers and the teacher population can have really detrimental outcomes for students academically.
Amy, are things getting better? I mean, are things, I remember, you know, I worked at Rice University a number of years ago, and I remember talking to a young woman who would say, you know, every time I go to an engineering class, it's like they never talk to me. They're just talking to the boys. And but are things changing? Are things getting better, do you think?
So I can tell you from a personal example. When I was an undergraduate, I struggled in physics, and I ended up needing to get a tutor. And I asked the tutor, who was a male, I asked how many physics majors were at my university, which is I went to NYU, so it's a large university. And he told me that there were 5 physics majors, but that one guy was probably going to drop because he got a girlfriend. But, you know, this was coming from somebody who was a physics major. So the trends are, I would say, changing, but particularly it varies by discipline. So, you know, engineering is still very male dominated, and it's frankly white male dominated in by and large. Biology is trending towards females. I sort of resent the fact that as a biologist and a woman, that people say, oh, well, biology, that's a kinder, gentler life science. Of course, there would be more women in that. But even within like disciplines of science, there are these like implicit biases that you sort of see across the board. And while I say there's maybe more women in biology, if you look at leadership positions, even at colleges or universities, the leadership positions are held by and large by men and not by women.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of gaps. You know, hopefully we're trending in the right direction. But I would say that the disparities are still present, as we may have experienced in our undergraduate careers, and persistent.
Sheila, how about for you? Are you seeing things especially maybe from your vantage point in Mississippi, are things getting better for children of color, for young girls that are growing up in the system in Mississippi in terms of STEM education?
I think so, to a small extent, because up until a few years ago, and I'm sure Alicia will agree with you on that, we had no coding program in the schools at all. And now that we have coding, we see more girls interested in the STEM program. And I'd like to jump on something with Amy. Well, we have to also think about every part of STEM. We have administrators to think, oh, I'm offering coding, so therefore I have a whole STEM program, I'm good. So they forget about the science and the engineering and the math part of it. And then you have some to think, oh, I'm offering a technology program. Again, goes back to technology. You have districts and superintendents that think that just because they're doing technology is the whole STEM program. But for us, we had a push for coding and robotics in Mississippi recently, and I see more girls in that now than I have in the previous years.
Sheila, let me follow up a question out of the question and A box, the Q&A box. are we seeing innovations? I mean, what are some of the big innovations that you are seeing in your work that you're thinking, wow, this is really making a difference?
Well, I think that some school districts, even though it's not required, some school districts, in addition to the science curriculum, they are actually offering a STEM program. It may not be what STEM should be, but it's a start. So I think that they're trying to go the route where in many places in the Mississippi, they're trying to go the route where they are offering whole STEM programs and not just the technology part. I see more of that in recent years.
Alicia, how about the question, are things getting better? And then innovations. Where do you see some innovations that sort of you're particularly excited about?
I'm particularly excited about shifting the mindset of a lot of elementary administrators on my in my realm of things with my peers, because I come from a STEM background and they respect my opinion. They are seeing it's opening up their eyes to, you know what, we actually do need it. And like Miss Sheila is saying, the coding aspect, and also seeing with some of the districts trying to implement some STEM, it is getting better with that, because even my son's 7th grade year, they started with the coding system at their school, and he's really enjoying it. Of course, the young girls are they're the elite in the group, but he's hanging tough right with them, so he's enjoying it. So just seeing it in my own family, which makes it more personal, that's how I know the dynamics is shifting to where it's not starting in college or high school, it's coming on down through the ranks.
Yeah. And innovations, that was, yeah.
Yeah, that's the biggest innovation for a rural area.
And are things getting better for you, though, do you think? Are you seeing things get better in regards to STEM education?
Overall, I think so. We're taking a setback and a major hit with COVID. We really are, because of the focus, air quotes again, are on the tested areas, your ELA and your mathematics. But if you continue to have people like myself who see the benefits of what STEM can do to bring, to be intertwined and intermingled with that, to bring the scores into fruition that everybody wants to, it can happen. But we've taken a hit, but we're going to get back up.
Yeah. Right at the beginning, Sheila, Dr. Moon mentioned this idea of when we talk about low-income kids, especially now we've seen through the COVID, this idea that if they're hungry, they're not going to do well. And in some ways, when we talk about STEM education, it's almost like on Maslow's hierarchy, there are a lot of things that we need to get to first, even just pure funding of schools. Has that been sort of an issue when we talk about schools like Alicia's schools, rural schools in Mississippi, and other schools in Mississippi, that we almost need to get to a certain level in our country in terms of funding before we could even perfect this whole idea of STEM education?
I think so, because one of the things that COVID has done is we saw the great divide. We had some of the schools that had funding, they automatically offered the virtual experiences for the students, and the schools without funding did not have, they were running around trying to make copies and put them at bus stops so the students can pick up the copies along with their food, because kids are not going to learn when they're hungry, as you said. But again, I think they're trying to provide funding. I know that one school district did not have it was a rural area that did not have internet hardly in any of the homes. So they start trying to put internet hotspots in areas that they know that the grocery stores, Walmart parking lot, so the kids can go to that area and do their homework.
Yeah, wow. Amy, I know in conversations with some of our staff, you mentioned this idea that English is the language of science. How does that translate when we look nationally, and certainly when we look in Texas, there are many kids whose English is not their primary language. They're not speaking it at home. What does that mean for those kids in terms of STEM education? What does that mean in terms of our job in getting them access to STEM education or interested in STEM?
Sure. I think if you are, a second language learner and you're learning and I think what it really does is it punctuates the importance of like inquiry-based teaching and learning. If you're if you're a student, you're a second language learner and you're learning in a science class and you're talking about a pen and you see the word, the word pen is written on a whiteboard or a smartboard, letters, those letters don't necessarily mean something, but when you have the opportunity, it's not popping up, which is to see the object and handle the object, whether it's in, a simulation in the virtual space or a physical material. I mean, I'm a strong advocate for getting your hands on stuff can really help, solidify the learning. I think that's the more ideal scenario. That's what the research indicates. However, there are some situations where things are either too small or too big for us to access anyway. So, I think that's the power of the virtual world. And so as much as students are able to engage with, not just like words on a page, they're going to pick up that language much more readily, because it's going to have more meaning. And it can be fun. So, I think this also gets to the point that like, learning can and should be fun. And I think it doesn't, regardless of your background or your language capability, if they engage in that in a way that's meaningful, they're going to retain it. And ultimately, potentially even want to pursue that later in life.
Is it a vicious circle that we're in when you talk about being fun, when most kids, when they go home, what they hear from their parents is like, oh, math. Oh, I hated math. I mean, is that sort of a vicious circle that these kids hear their folks saying that?
It is. I think it's funny because I think there is sort of this implicit bias, like, we wouldn't accept a child to be illiterate. Like that would never be a goal, but like, it's cool if you don't, oh, science is hard or math is hard or I don't understand it. And that's completely acceptable. And really for a lot of people, K-12 is the opportunity for them to get their fundamental science and engineering and technology understanding. So it's sort of now or never.
Wow.
So that is a bit of a challenge, and trying to get sort of parents on board with it. I think the trick is really, again, the kids. Like if kids are really excited about it, they're gonna take it home and be like, at the dinner table or sharing with their parents, we did this really cool thing. And that can be infectious in a good way, not in a COVID way.
Yeah. But I think that's the thing, is that science, STEM, is fun, right? I mean, everything about STEM is really fun, and there has to be ways. I mean, you guys have figured out ways to express that, but there needs to be more people doing that. Let me ask each of you one last question as we sort of wrap up this segment, this roundtable. And Alicia, I'll start with you. One thing that you would do as we sort of become evangelists around this changing STEM education, what's the one thing that you would encourage us to do, that you would encourage all of us in America to do around STEM education?
I would encourage everyone to start young with their children. Start young. We plant all other seeds. Plant the seed of STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or STEAM, arts. Everybody's adding a piece to it. Plant the seed that this is also good. That is not just good, it's great. And you can do anything you want to do. And it is very fluid. It is the one thing about science, it's ever changing. And most things aren't. It is ever changing. And that bring it to the realization that you can find STEM in everything in this world. So if you say that and you make children begin to see that there's science in there, there's technology in there, there's engineering, mathematics in that, plant the seed of how awesome STEM is starting young.
Excellent. Sheila, the one big change you would make?
One of the big change I will make will probably be with everyone. We sometimes tell kids, even young kids, if they ask a question, we tell them, oh, okay, just go away. If we continue to question, if they ask a question, we ask another question. So one of the things I think we could do is continuously ask questions. Don't provide the answers. Just, so what do you think? Even around the dinner table, they're asking questions. Well, why do you think this happened? If you're outside in your yard, well, why do you think I put this here? So one of the things I think we can do as parents and as educators is to continually to ask many, many, many questions.
Absolutely. Very good. Thank you, Sheila. Amy, how about for you? What's the one thing we should change?
One thing I would like is to not have to go third on such a robust panel because everybody has stolen my answers. But yeah, I mean, yes, I have to concur first with Alicia and Sheila that, you know, sort of engaging and inspiring kids and finding STEM everywhere, like in their everyday life, connecting to authentic experiences that they have is, you know, key. And honestly, I would argue that we're in a time that it is everywhere, and so it's actually easier if people think that it was difficult to begin with. But I think the other thing that we can all do, and I realize I'm sort of preaching to the choir here, is that I think one of the things that COVID has really shone a light on in a positive way is how important educators are to everything that people do. You know, I don't know how many parents have told me, I cannot wait until my children go back to school. I cannot do this. I don't know how teachers do this. You know, please help. I know just my niece and my brother has had to get outside help to try and help his kids because he's like, he's an economics major and he's like, I can't help them with the math. So I think if we walk away from this valuing educators in a more robust way to do and empower them to do their jobs, then I think we're all better for it.
Yeah. I think what's clear though, right? I think all of us would agree there's a lot of work to be done, right? I mean, it's, while we maybe see some seeds that some positive things happening, you know, in the end, we're all optimists or else we wouldn't be speaking here. But the data is showing that we shouldn't be as optimistic as we are. There's a lot of work to be done, right? I mean, we really have to change a lot of minds out there and change programs. It's amazing because we're just not doing, I mean, we're doing the job, but just there are not enough people doing this job. I mean, it's pretty clear. So Dr. Amico from the Smithsonian, Sheila Smith, Science Education Consultant out of Jackson, Mississippi, and Principal Alicia Conerly from Monticello, Mississippi. Thank you guys very much for being part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
And let's go to our next roundtable, another group of superstars. Let's bring in Dr. Tia Matkins, Lucinda Presley, and Sharon Delsbor. Let's get you guys up here. Very good. We have Tia. Tia is with us. She's with the UT STEM Center out of Austin, Texas. And Sharon. Oh, Sharon, I'm going to, Delsbor, did I get that right? Oh, okay, very good. Dr. Sharon Delsbor, she's president of the Association for Multicultural Science Education. She's out of Fort Bend ISD in Texas. And do we have Lucinda here? There's Lucinda Presley. She's the executive director of the Innovation Collaborative out of Washington, D.C. Lucinda, how's the D.C. today?
Actually, I work from Texas. Back and forth.
So you're out of Texas. Very good. Okay, excellent then. So, and Sharon, how has the rain affected you guys? I know there's been that little storm in your area. Dr. Delsbor.
One received the face shield.
I apologize. We're actually having an announcement. So we're making sure that we're getting our PPE out to everyone. But we had a tropical storm, Beta, came through. But we have recovered quickly and we're doing well. So thank you for asking.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you guys for being here. And let's start, Dr. Madkins, let's start where the other panel left off in terms of the one thing that you would do to change STEM education in our country. Where would you go?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. The one thing I would change is deficit thinking. We're all guilty of it at some point, and deficit thinking is basically having negative thoughts, thinking less than of others. We all do it to some degree, but it's the one thing that could really affect change in our entire world, but especially in our classrooms and the ways that we think about educators. That's going to require each of us to examine the ways in which we're each complicit in perpetuating racist and biased narratives about who our students are, who their families are, the communities that they come from, and then who gets to learn and do STEM, right? It also would change how we provide access to and how we facilitate rigorous STEM learning opportunities for all of our children. I apologize for my voice. It's peak allergy season right now in Austin. But historically, and even in our contemporary times, race and gender have been key factors in who gets access to STEM courses, especially advanced STEM courses when you're thinking about secondary and higher education, and the kinds of learning that's available in those spaces when students actually get access to them. So if educators would do the hard work of internally examining their biases and thinking about the ways that they explicitly and implicitly message that to their students and their families, I think we would dramatically change STEM education.
Excellent. Sharon, can you give us sort of the one thing for you?
That was so eloquently stated.
I know,
it is definitely an issue in regards to equity and diversity. When we think of equity, it really puts the leaders that make decisions on the platform of being accountable. And we can't be accountable if we don't take the opportunity to self-reflect, to think about the biases that are systemic. And those systemic biases are those hurdles that lead to decision-making where the access isn't there and the availability isn't there for different diverse groups. So I agree wholeheartedly in response to the fact that we definitely have to start looking at the root of matters and where we form our foundation of understanding and our foundation of why we do what we do. So if we're going to truly make a movement, and this is the best opportunity to do so in this pandemic, to be able to do some system changing, not just system thinking, but system changing in order to make STEM more accessible to our students, the time is now.
Yeah. Lucinda, can you talk a little bit about sort of that one thing for you? And then I guess you have some slides. Is that correct, Lucinda?
Right, if you want. If not, I can just talk. So, I agree with what Sharon and Tia have said. It's really important, and we have an amazing opportunity right now to rethink our whole education system. And as we do that, to really focus on equity and diversity and making opportunities equal for everything. And we found this in the STEAM movement, which I've been a part of for maybe 20 or 25 years. And my goal would be to see if we change the system is to integrate higher level thinking with content learning across the board. Because what we've seen in our collaboratives research is that when we do this, when we integrate the arts with STEM, we see a huge difference in equity. We see a huge difference in engagement of females and children of color. And we also see a difference in content acquisition and content retention. So my goal, if we could rechange the world, would be to focus on innovative and creative thinking skills, adding that to our students' toolbox.
Wow.
To prepare them for the workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And staying in that line of thinking, Sharon, what for you, what has been the biggest innovation that you have seen, much like what Lucinda's talking about?
For me, the incorporation of the arts has been a huge benefit. Allowing our students to emerge that creative component into STEM, bringing about STEAM, is something that has, again, like Lucinda said, helped to elevate our processing. Because when you have creativity, our cultural thoughts, our backgrounds, and our diverseness helps to ignite that type of creativity. And it also then implores the higher level thinking that we're desiring our students to have. So it's really important that we start to incorporate the things that make us different into STEM, because it just takes things to another level. And you know, regardless of whatever subgroup that you're speaking of, you know, the difference in young men and young women, or ethnicity, or you know, social economics, experiences will help to enhance our STEM learning.
Tia, Dr. Matkins, we heard earlier that you say you're a STEMinist. I love that, right? I wish I could be a STEMinist. I guess I could, right? Talk a little bit about that idea of being a STEMinist and what it means.
It just means centering the role of women, for me at least. It means centering the role of women in STEM. And so thinking about, you know, what Dr. D has talked about, right, with thinking about diversity. If you think about diverse perspectives, right, we do better, we solve problems better when we're thinking about diverse perspectives. And women have so much to offer in terms of STEM and technology solutions. I think if we don't value that and think about how we can center that, then a lot is lost. On one of the projects I'm working on currently, we have a teacher consultant, and she said something that was so profound. She said, we know that every child has talent, but for many, many years, we have ignored that talent, and our world in terms of STEM has suffered because of that. And so if educators, if families, if all of us would think about the power of our girls and learn to recognize the myriad ways that they show us their intelligence, show us their curiosity, then we would really, I think, move ahead in terms of STEM. And so that's what being a STEMinist is all about for me.
We talked in the first panel about that drop off between elementary and middle and high school. Is it about having more women teachers? Is it about sort of a different attitude around science as they get into upper grades? What's going on there that needs to change from your perspective?
It's all of those things. I think, you know, part of our work as teacher educators, right, is to help our pre-service teachers especially learn to recognize all of those things and how to foster, to build upon the many rich resources that our children bring to the classroom and recognize them as resources rather than seeing them as deficits, right? And so thinking about the ways that they're doing STEM at home, especially our young girls, right? We know that, as was mentioned earlier, across the board, girls in elementary school are actually more interested in STEM, particularly science, than boys are. But we see that drop off happen very quickly in middle school. And part of that is about the way that we socialize children, but more than that, it's about the messages that we're giving implicitly and explicitly. And so if teachers, I think, and I'll just speak for teachers because that's who I work with for the most part, is part of it is learning to see in a different way. And if we can learn to do that, to recognize all the different ways that our girls are showing us that they're smart, that they're more than capable, and that they actually want to do these things, rather than dismissing what they're saying, then I think we can start to see a little bit of that drop off. We can push back against that.
Lucinda, from the innovation collaborative perspective, what are the things that we should be doing differently at the district level to encourage STEM education?
If you don't mind showing slide 5, I'm going to back up. So if we could show slide 5, that'll help. That'll really help answer the question.
Let's see if we could show slide 5. They
So
keep have great slides, and that I need to go to your slides.
So I'll preface that with the collaborative is a coalition of the leading STEM, arts, and humanities institutions across the country, like NSTA, you know, National Science Teachers, National Engineering Technology Teachers, National Art Teachers, a number of institutions, and we're in our 7th year of research. So what we're in K-12, in what promotes these important thinking skills in concert with content acquisition. And we're also really, and Sharon's a part of this, so we're also focusing on reaching diverse students and teachers. And in some of our latest data in the research, with teachers across the country, we closed the gap, which means the findings, the content, and the results were the same for the white and non-white students, which was a big deal. And we found that in using it, and then in this, we were using the collaborative strategies and lessons. And we found in elementary, there was 189% increase in creativity. And in secondary, 129% increase, which relates not only to problem solving, but also to being able to understand content and apply it. So as we, and these are our thinking skills. So we you know, the institutions collaborated across disciplines and developed this set of thinking skills that we use to evaluate creative thinking. If you'll go back one slide there. So as we work on addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, we've noticed that a number of the strategies that help address diverse students are really the strategies that work in STEAM. And I've been working with NASA on the Mars project, and this is maybe year 14, and in a STEAM project, and I've seen tremendous differences in the students' content acquisition, also in their creative thinking and the ability to apply their standards-based content to solving a problem. And especially the students of color, resource students, and girls. And this is elementary into middle school. And what we've seen is that's really applicable is we're relating this to their lives, so you can see relevance. So the students are seeing that the STEM problem they're solving is relevant to their lives, but they're seeing multiple pathways to solve it. And one of them includes using arts thinking skills, process skills like persistence and risk-taking and envisioning, like seeing the solution in your head. And we're also using higher level thinking, which is when and the neuroscientists that work with us say when you integrate content, when you integrate disciplines, this is what our brains are wired to do. So when you integrate these disciplines, you're feeding your brain and actually growing neuronal connections. And then expectations. We expect excellence from the kids. And what we've seen is they rise to the occasion. When we ask the teachers not to tell us unless there's a discipline problem we need to know about, who are the resource kids and who are the problem kids. And we've seen the students that were low actually rise far above the teachers and their peers' expectations because we expected it. We didn't expect them to perform poorly. And then the types of experiences are really important, and we're letting go of the teacher as the expert model that we all grew up with, so that now the teachers are only facilitators. They're facilitating the students' learning and making sure it's culturally relevant, whether it's working in an ESL classroom or working in a room with primarily females. We're making sure it addresses where they are. And it's experiential, like Amy was talking about. It's all about inquiry, and it's always collaborative with multiple ways to look at a solution. So multiple perspectives and multiple solutions possible as long as they're using the STEM mandated content correctly. And then letting them know, our researchers tell us that the students need to know about this from the beginning to the end. They need to know that this is what we're doing and why we're doing it. We're not just throwing them off the cliff, and we do it gradually. So we don't throw them off a steam cliff from the beginning. We sort of acclimate them to the strategies and the arts principles, the STEM principles, and how they can integrate. And we found that assessing this quantitatively is a challenge. So we have really pivoted to qualitative assessments, which are like portfolios or process assessments or looking at rubrics. And we're working now to convert the qualitative findings to quantitative.
Very good. Lucinda, thank you very much. And thank you for the slides that you brought as well. Dr. Delsbar, I wonder if you might talk a little bit about the importance of we live in Texas, right, where the majority of our children are children of color. How important is it for those kids to see teachers that look like them in terms of STEM education, in terms of everything?
Absolutely important. When I started teaching several years ago, my passion for teaching remained because I wanted students to see people that looked like me, because these were the students that I was teaching. And even as I've moved into administration, I've kept my love for science, because when we're talking about decision making for students, and we're talking about decision making for students of color, I need to be in the room, because that is my culture, that is my background. And if we don't purposefully begin to recruit others who are of color, then the excitement, the desire, the hope to become that STEM educator, it falls short. Kind of going back onto something that you said earlier about interests, how they tend to change from elementary to secondary. Some of that thought for me, also comes into the fact that when you get to secondary level, because that's actually where I work, there are so many things for students to become involved in. And it goes back to even what Tia said about how we socialize our kids to begin to participate in different activities. And so a lot of our students of color are now able to begin to participate in UIL activities. And so now, we tend to persuade our kids to move into participating in different sports. That sometimes then causes, the academics to take a back seat in regards to desiring to be in more thought-provoking courses. So sometimes we have to really be honest about what we're actually moving kids towards. And so the other perspective of that becomes when we begin to help kids to decide on careers. Are we truly asking and looking for and purposely recruiting people of color to go into education? So that, again, when they're in the classroom, who are our students seeing?
Yeah.
We tend to really think about the fact, we want you to become a doctor, we want you to become an engineer, we want you to become professions in these STEM realms. But we have to also stop and think about who's going to be the next generation to educate these STEM realms. So just a couple of things in regards to that had come to mind, because when I see me, I then become more available and more alert to learning.
Dr. Delsbar, let me go, something you said about UIL though, that I think is very interesting. And so this is a delicate question for us in Texas, right? Because in Texas, Friday Night Lights, we love football. I mean, I love football. Yes, we love it. Right? Yeah, football is life. And when we go to pass a bond referendum in any school district, it's all about building the football stadium bigger, and then we'll use some other money. And I remember a number of years ago when Mike Morath, who's the TEA commissioner of Texas, when he was on the school board in Dallas ISD, he said, why don't we eliminate 12th grade and use some of that money for other things that need it? And the pushback was, no, we can't eliminate 12th grade because it's bad for sports, right? It's bad for football.
Let's be clear.
Yeah. So what do we have our priorities out of whack when we know that to invest in STEM would really do better for the careers of these kids than an investment in athletics? Or is it just reality and we just have to live with it? I mean, where are our priorities when it comes to this stuff?
I think it's just the reality of understanding that in each and every organization, regardless of what you're dealing with, the bottom line is the dollar. And so what is it that is generating funding? So I think it becomes that point of view of understanding what is generating decision-making. But with that being said, it kind of goes back to, I'm sorry, I'm about to hit an.
Do you want me to move to another question for someone else, Sharon? With that, or are you're waiting for the announcement to be over? Yeah. Let me move. I'll move to Tia. So Tia, let me start with that, and I have another question for you. But Dr. Madkins, this priority on football, is it misplaced for us in Texas?
Sorry, my internet was, I was getting an unstable Wi-Fi message. Was the question that we're spending too much money on football?
Yeah, so is our priorities misplaced in Texas with a focus on football instead of on STEM?
At the risk of getting in trouble with all of my other Southern relatives, yes. My daddy is from Henderson, which is in East Texas. And before we had to move him in with my sister, he lived down the street from Henderson High School. And I got caught in the trap. The only time there's traffic in his town is on Friday nights. I think, to Dr. D's point, I think part of it is understanding where our kids are going, right? And showing them all of the possibilities. So where we invest is where what we're saying is important. I come from a family of educators, both on my mother's side and my father's side. Two of my favorite maternal aunts collectively have taught for almost 100 years in Shreveport, Louisiana. My aunt, who's 80 years old, told me just this summer, if she could go back and do it all over again, she would do it tomorrow. But because she has Parkinson's disease, she had to retire. She retired like 2 or 3 times. That's how much she loves teaching and how important it is to her for kids to see someone who looks like her. Now, let me say this, is it important for all children to see teachers from minoritized backgrounds, or what we commonly say is the people of color. But it is especially important for our students who are Black and brown to see teachers who look like them in the classroom for a lot of different reasons. It's beyond the role model narrative. That's one important one, but it's also to answer someone's question that was in the Q&A. It's about promoting social justice and thinking about those things that are important to people of color, right? And so when you have teachers like you, it's more likely from what we see in research that they're gonna teach in ways that are more aligned with your cultural background. And I think someone asked in the chat, how do we get experienced STEAM professionals into teaching? We have to show them that there are options for them. I think we have to do a better job of respecting teachers, and in our country, we don't show teachers that we respect them in the same way that we do other professions. And I think the salaries that we give is one indicator of that. And the kinds of professional development opportunities that we provide. But I think if we want more experienced STEAM professionals to get into the teaching profession, we have to show them a different side of it. And from my own research, from others who've done work around alternative certification or kind of second career teachers, that's where we're getting a lot of those professionals coming in from STEAM fields, is people who want this as a second profession. So they go and make a lot of money in the STEAM fields, right? And then come back into teaching, and we have to show them that that's a viable option.
Yeah. Sharon, you wanted to finish your point before that rude announcement that came up, right?
Thank you guys so much. So that's actually the point that I did want to make, in regards to, what is it that we're really projecting as important in society as a whole? And it is trying to live that American dream of, building wealth. And so when we don't value educators the way that we should, and number one is monetarily, we're not going to see that diversity within the teaching community. Because to be honest with you, I think the only reason why I continue to do what I do is because when I was in 10th grade, I was impacted by my biology teacher who was a Black female. So it really is important that we get diversity into our classrooms, but it does come from intentional recruiting. Going to our HBCUs, to those that are educator majors, and really speaking with them to say, hey, do you want to be a science teacher? How can I help you? How can I support you? How can I mentor you?
Tia, question I wanted to ask you was, I've worked at a number of universities. I worked at Rice University for many years, and what we saw at Rice were a lot of kids coming in who had an interest in STEM and fewer of them graduating. In other words, they were weeding kids out who came in with this immense interest, frankly, high SAT scores, right? They're getting into Rice, but they're weeding them out. I then went to be a dean at a small liberal arts college in Amherst, Massachusetts, where it was the opposite. Few kids with an interest in science, but then when they discovered experiential science, that number that graduate grew. How do we do that in our schools when we know that the natural interest, because of parental influence or whatever, sometimes is, well, I don't like math, but how do we grow that in terms of our early school grades, but also in high school?
That's a really good and big question. I think part of the answer is, for me, part of it is recognizing the different ways that STEM is a part of our everyday lives, and pointing that out. I have to give credit to my parents who fostered that curiosity in me and showed me all the different ways that the things that I was interested in were scientific, right? And so valuing the knowledge that we bring. I was always a curious child, my dad, and I was really good at crafting an argument as one of the older girls in my family. And so my dad said, oh, you make a great lawyer. But I wasn't really invested in that in the same way that I was around issues of science. And so I loved to bake, I loved fashion, I loved beauty. I've always been into those things. And so figuring out how they worked and how they work together was really important to me. And so helping kids to see, especially young girls, thinking about just kind of how we can foster that curiosity and keep it going. And so helping them to understand and to make those connections at an early age is really important, and not dismissing that as like, some people might say that's folk science, or it's not real science, right? Just if when we get rid of that kind of thinking and then really centering what our kids are doing at home, what they're doing in our classrooms, and trying to make those align as much as possible, that's actually going to really help our kids to sustain and to persist in STEM, particularly in the sciences. We do a lot of, as you already mentioned, a lot of weeding out at the undergraduate level. I think part of my role at UT is working with the McNair Scholars Program, and that's a mentoring program that really supports first gen students who come from low income communities, et cetera, to one, do undergraduate research so that they position themselves well to go into graduate school. I work with our STEM scholars and the stories that they tell about the ways that they're even that professors try to weed them out of those undergraduate courses. It's heart-wrenching in many ways. And so I think we all have to do our part at the K-12 level so that they have it within them to know that they can do this once they get to the undergraduate and graduate levels.
Very good. As our final round of questions, I'll start with you, Lucinda. But as we move forward, and we imagine that a lot of teachers, science, STEM teachers, will be seeing this dialogue, right, as we sort of get this out to groups. What's the one piece of advice that you would give to STEM teachers in terms of the work that they are doing, especially as it relates to teaching young girls and children of color? What's the piece of advice you would give a STEM teacher? And I'll ask everyone the same question. Lucinda?
Good. That's a great question. And my advice would be to integrate the arts and humanities with STEM. Obviously, that's what I do, but because our research has shown what a difference it makes. And also to integrate K-12, which Sharon's a part of it, and the K-12 initiative in the collaborative, and Amy is a part of the out of school time initiative in the collaborative. So to go on those field trips, but not just a field trip, but to integrate it with in school, the classroom content. So promoting those higher level thinking skills through integrating disciplines and through integrating in school and out of school time experiences.
Excellent, very good. And I love this idea of integration. I love the idea of experiential education. All of that really grabs kids in ways that it normally wouldn't. Dr. D, how about for yourself?
For me, it is really important when I'm talking to teachers that I help them to remember to meet the kids where they are. And again, back to what Lucinda was saying, be mindful of the skills that we are really trying to incorporate and teach kids. Build on that curiosity through observation. Build on how to communicate, in appropriate manners. When we help to build on those basic processing skills of, classification and measuring and inferencing and predicting, when we really focus on the skill piece of science as a way of thinking, I feel that is what piques the interest of kids to be more curious, to ask more questions, to think of a process to come to conclusions to questions.
Very good. Tia, Dr. Matkins, how about yourself? What's your piece of advice?
I agree with everything that Lucinda and Sharon have said so far. I think for me, my message to all STEM teachers, no matter what grade level you're working at, is thinking about issues of rigor, right? The kinds of standards and experiences that you're facilitating for children. In Texas, we haven't adopted next generation science standards, but those practices like scientific sense making, argumentation, et cetera, those are in the I&E standards. That's how we sneak them in. So do that. That's how we move from learning about to actually doing STEM, right? Is really engaging in those practices, the investigation and experimentation standards, and then thinking about issues of equity. How are you building upon the strengths of your students? How are you modeling for them that they belong? How are you modeling for them that they can use this STEM content knowledge to empower themselves in their communities to affect changes that are important to them, not necessarily to you as the educator, but to the child, their families, and their communities.
Let me ask you guys one last question, just because we have 2 more minutes. And so if you guys are giving and you guys are all in Texas, so if you're giving a letter grade to Texas in terms of how we're doing with STEM education, especially as it relates to children of color and young women, what's the letter grade that you're giving us? And I'll start with you, Dr. Matkins. What grade do we get in Texas?
Oh, Dr. Bob, you're trying to get me in trouble once again. You already asked about football.
I know.
Well, I will defer to our other panelists about an actual grade, but here's what I will say about the way.
No, you have to give a grade. This is not a gradeless course. We have grades here.
Focus on learning rather than grading is what I tell my students. But if I had to give a grade, I would say we need to do better. If we are giving like an E for excellent, S for satisfactory, U for unsatisfactory, I think that's safer for me. I would give us a U plus. And I say that because we are not centering enough around the things that we teach, the things that we do in classrooms to be culturally relevant. I know for a fact at the elementary level, we are not doing enough with science, engineering, technology, computer science. And so we have to do better with that, and we have to teach it in ways that are congruent with what our kids want to learn, right?
Yeah.
And what's important to them.
U plus sounds like a C minus to me. I'm just, you know, but that's my own, right? So Sharon, how about you? What are you thinking, Dr. D?
I'm gonna put a letter on it, and I'm gonna say C. And the reason why I say C is because there is not enough integrated communication with policy and stakeholders. And when I say that in just what I see in our classrooms, how we differentiate the science curriculum from the CTE curriculum, and the lack of communication in between. If we're really gonna start to say that we are trying to promote STEM, then science and career technology education have to communicate with each other, because you're now putting in practice with the content.
Very good. And Lucinda, how about yourself? What are you grading? What are you saying these days?
I'm between Tia and Sharon, and I agree with everything they said. I think the Texas focus on memorization and focus on testing mainly for content could be so improved by testing for the science STEM practices, the STEM thinking skills. This is what the kids are going to need in their academic careers and going forward. And also looking at this from a policy standpoint, not just in the schools, it has to start at the state level. And so I think like the NGSS, we need to really hone down and get these kids to start thinking for themselves in an open-ended STEM inquiry fashion.
So Lucinda, you're saying you're between a C and a C minus, right in between there?
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys are like really nice, right? I mean, you know, and I think it's because we know we have some districts that are doing things that are really trying hard, right? But when I look at the majority of Texas, right, I have to say it's probably more along the lines of a D, right, in terms of serving students of color and young women. So it's so you guys are very nice, right? So thank you very much, Dr. Madkins, Dr. Delsbohr, Lucinda. Thank you very, very much for the work that you're doing day in and day out to promote STEM education in our state. I certainly appreciate it. And thanks for being here for this panel. It's fantastic.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Very good. And I want to thank, as we end up today, I want to thank my good buddies, Fraser Wilson from Shell, who is one of our big supporters. Also, Vishy Engar, who's also here from Shell. We want to thank him for his support. Everyone over at Shell. We want to thank the Texas Family Leadership Council as well. So thank you guys. Well, I want to make sure you fill out that survey as well, just to see how we did, and that will be up there. And I think it's in the chat box. There it is. Dr. Moon has just put it up. Make sure you fill out that post-event survey. It really helps us get moving. Thank you, everybody. And keep up the work. We need to get STEM education well ahead of the game. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.